This is called, it's part of your recent work series, part of the League's recent work series, and I asked someone, what does that mean exactly? They said, well, just show things since the last time you showed recent work at the League. So I've never shown work at the League, so I have a presentation consisting of 35 years of work to share with you. But I pared it down, and to kind of make it a little bit more focused, I just took nothing but projects I did that had some element of working with architects or for architects or alongside of architects or on behalf of the field of architecture in different ways. And I call it how-to partly because that's the way this new book that I have out is organized, but also it's because I kind of think one of the things that I always find interesting when I'm in the audience where you are listening to someone in my position, what I always think is it's sort of, you can see the pictures of the work or experience it in person if you want, but how you got there and why you made the decisions you made is always the part that interests me. So that's what I'll try to talk about today. So it's also kind of how to make architecture out of paper. I'm a graphic designer. I work in 2 dimensions. It's very rare for me to do things in 3 dimensions and scary for me to do things in 3 dimensions, but I live vicariously through the worlds of people that do. So many of you architects in the audience and beyond. My introduction to the world of architecture after I graduated from, as Reed said, the University of Cincinnati, where they have an interdisciplinary program, really came not when I was a young man growing up in Parma, Ohio, Easter Sunday, 1969. I am in the back with that beautiful full head of hair in front of my twin brothers, behind my twin brothers Ronald and Donald. And my mom and dad, and this is Parma, Ohio, one of the less heralded suburbs, the south suburbs of Cleveland. But I moved to New York, and I got a job working, as Reed said, for Massimo and Lella Vignelli. That was my first job out of school, with my beard, with still hair, with a mistied tie. But I really loved working there. They became my surrogate partners. I ended up working there for 10 years. I like to think that, I've often wondered why they hired me. I think it was because Leila was from Udine and Massimo was from Milano and I was from Parma, Ohio. You know, Massimo and Lella were both trained as architects, as one is when you practice in Europe and in Italy in particular. And Massimo, when I worked for him, was the go-to graphic designer, the trusted graphic design source for New York and indeed after a point the world's architects. And you know much of his work and you associate it, I assume, as I do, with many well-known architects. When I started there in the summer, the summer of 1980, I think the very first thing I was given was a price list for Heller, actually. And I acquitted myself well with that. Then I was given the job to help organize, or kind of like just do the secretarial, clerical work on this exhibition that Massimo was doing for the anniversary of this organization he was involved with called the Architectural League of New York, which was celebrating what would have been its 700th anniversary, collaboration, artists and architects. So I worked on that, and then Massimo designed this newspaper for this other thing called the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies, and so I had to go paste up Skyline with Suzanne Stevens and Margot Jacks once a month in an attic on West 40th Street across from the then terrifying precinct of Bryant Park, New York, well before Dan Biederman came along, and it was really a hotbed of vice, and you took your life in your hands when you visited the IAUS, or left it late at night after laying out that tabloid. So my introduction to the world of architecture was really through those kinds of experiences. And 10 years later, when I joined Pentagram, I found that many of the younger architects that I've been working with, and a few of the older architects that had gotten tired of getting pushed around by Massimo and thought they could sort of have a similar experience but push me around instead because I was younger and more callow. I ended up doing some work for architects, and so I'll show you a lot of this stuff, and the rest of the presentation will be that. So, back in the late 90s, I got a call from Robert A.M. Stern. He had just been appointed Dean of the Yale School of Architecture, and he was well aware of the fact that there were expectations and worries about what kind of dean he would be. And I think I had already designed a number of the books that you know that look like this, these large monographs with sturdy, centered, Trajan-style typography. And I think, there may have been people out there that were assuming that Bob would just instate some sort of new version of the Beaux-Arts up in New Haven. And the first thing he said to me was just, I want to surprise people. And I was being hired to do a graphic program to do all the promotion for the activities that would happen up at the School of Architecture. And he had just come from Columbia, where they had this graphic program that a colleague of mine, Billy Kuntz, had been doing for years using a single typeface. I'm going to name typefaces in this crowd if this is okay. I usually don't do it in mixed company, but I feel safe here. It's a safe space to talk about typefaces. So Billy had used nothing but Univers bold condensed 57 and 47. And you could tell those posters at any at any like lunchroom in any architecture firm, they always had the same typography. And I thought, well, what typeface shall I use for Yale? Then Bob said, I want to surprise people, so it wouldn't be like this. And I thought, what if it was like that? And so I said, here's my idea. We're never going to use the same typeface twice. We're just going to change it up every time. There won't even be a logo. There'll just be a Y, and a circle will change to Y every single time. So I've done, I think, almost like 90 posters now, all the same size, all using different typefaces, all in support of the program up at Yale. And one of the early ones I did was this. This was about art and architecture up there. We've done twice a year we do a poster promoting the speakers. You can tell how far back this goes. You Don Draper fans, those are slides that go in a carousel projector. That's how we did it back in those days, kids. And so these were actually almost the opposite of what graphic design practice would call for. They just were within the confines of a single color, black on white paper, and a single size. We just sort of like did it every which way. And it became this great kind of flexing thing we ended up doing in our office, where every once in a while there was something you could work with, like something called architecture and psychoanalysis. So then you take a proper couch, you stand up all the text on the couch, then you do, if you can see it, that Y is made out of a Rorschach blot forming a Y. So there's all sorts of little hints in there for you. About cities, tribute to Charles Moore. Sometimes it's just something I don't understand. In that case, I always set it really big in hopes that someone will decipher it for me. Things for open houses, the occasional, sexy thing, a symposium on seduction and architecture. So a really great lettering artist named Marion Banges did that sexy lettering for me. Open House. This was the most controversial one I did, where I said, all the type is exactly the same size, and the important things are made bold, and the really important things are made bold and underlined. And I kept saying, you can read it, but no. So another open house poster. George Nelson, I know it was Irving Harper that really designed this clock, but when I knew without counting, I could tell in this funny Rain Man way that George Nelson had 12 letters in his name, so you have to do this. And so this has been a really great experience running through all these things. Dean Stern and John Jacobson and his whole team up there have been remarkably patient and indulgent, and sometimes send it back and says you can't read it or we just don't like it, but really it's been a real joy just to kind of ring these variations on a theme where there's just very few restraints actually. So this is the symposium that they just had last month, and this is for the open house. These are the two most recent ones we've done. I sort of have a problem where I really don't have that much conviction about the way graphic design should look. If any of you knew Massimo Vignelli, he had lots of conviction about the way graphic design should look, thought we should all be using one of 5 typefaces that would change sometimes. It's sort of like Helvetica, Bodoni, Garamond. He used Optima every now and then, which I consider a horrible typeface. I'm not sure I've ever used it even for Yale. But I just don't have an ideology about it, and I find that makes me very susceptible to, among other things, mimicry, which I don't think is a trait that's really desirable in a designer, but I like doing it, and it sort of leads me to sort of do this kind of forensic kind of design sometimes that, in the case of, say, the restoration of Lever House that happened several years ago when SOM redid the curtain wall and everything, I was asked to come in and redo the signage, which was all, at that point not code compliant and kind of deteriorating. And what we did was we kind of examined, almost like CSI typography. You know, dum, dum, dum. We went in and sort of like made a record of all the extant letters and kind of extrapolated the whole alphabet and digitized it. So it turned out that no lettering looked exactly like this, and the things that almost did were really sad and kind of depressing. And so we came up with a typeface called Lever Sans that doesn't really look exactly like anything else, and that's the typeface that's instated there now. So my goal was to not have anyone say who did that. You know, I assume the person, I just want people to think that whoever did that typeface is dead, because he or she would be, because it really fits in with the way things looked back in 1952, 5, 7, 6, 4, 54, thank you. I knew someone in this august audience would be able to correct my history. And so, you know, with all the code compliant things that are necessary, and even kind of installed on the outside. Some people say that this is attributed to Raymond Loewy, but not proven by anyone exactly. So, and so that kind of ability kind of reached its apotheosis. Is that the good one? Nader's the bad one, right? You decide. At Celebration, Florida, where we were the consulting graphic designers, which is one of my favorite projects I've ever done. As I always tell people, it was the most idealistic project I've done. The people involved at Disney were absolute true believers. They were convinced that they were going to create a model of new urbanism that would be done properly and done at a scale that it would just be so convincing that no one would think otherwise. No one would think there was an alternative to way to build a house in America. This Walt Disney kind of planning Epcot, and Epcot originally was supposed to be the experimental prototype city of tomorrow, and did not become that, but instead Celebration, Florida, adjacent to the Disney property in Orlando, became that with Robert Stern and Jacqueline Robertson as the master planning architects, and a star-studded cast of architects, including Philip Johnson, Charles Moore, Robert Venturi, Denise Scott Brown, Michael Graves, and on, doing signature buildings there. And so we were asked just simply to do the lettering on the signs. And so it looks like that today. It looks like the town you grew up in and wish you had, as they said. So we kind of created, as one does when you're kind of like doing this sort of thing, a kind of a mental model of where the signs would have come from, decided that there was a town sign maker who would have had one typeface he used all the time. And technically, there was only one typeface that had the characteristics that we like, which is a typeface called Cheltenham. You know it because the New York Times converted all their headline styles to Cheltenham about 15 years ago. But then this was before that, and I just knew it because it was a serif typeface with chunky serifs, and the thins weren't too thin, so you'd laser cut it out of metal like this. And what I didn't know about Cheltenham was who the designer is. Anyone know who designed Cheltenham? It was designed by an architect, Bertram Goodhue. So that was when I found that out, that was like my silver bullet. You know, I'd be presenting all these sign programs to this, star chamber of famous architects, and they'd be looking at me skeptically like, ooh, you know, what's all this stuff about typefaces? And I'd say, and then I've chosen Cheltenham, designed by Bertram Goodhue. And then, oh, Cheltenham. So all the signs there are Cheltenham in different weights, and this is a tall fence around a live oak tree as you come into town. We also had this idea about kind of introducing this pictorial language that you find in places up here like Forest Hills Gardens, and you find in Winter Park down there in Florida and around the country. It was a nice way of integrating imagery with signage that fell on the wayside. We designed a lot of manhole covers for some reason, only one design of which became a manhole cover. Others became designs for fountains and stuff like that. We did all the retail signs in town that was just sort of this delirious kind of opportunity to explore different production techniques. That's an actual manhole cover. All these, you know, Caesar Pelli did the Celebration Twin cinemas there. Oh, and then we got asked to design the visitor center, and my then partner, James Bieber, really came up with the idea, which was there were these beautiful Michael McCann watercolors of the houses they were going to build, and he just said, why don't we just blow them up full size? And so this is basically a billboard with a watercolor painting of a house with a real portico put in the front, but from the side it looks like that. And when you go in, it's just as a bunch of like trailers, you know. And so people would literally go up and jiggle the doorknob and try to be baffled, why doesn't it work? It's because it's painted on the billboard. And inside, it was really designed to look like a work in progress. So this is really Jim's idea. We just provided the supporting graphics for the whole thing. And got a credit line in the corner of the plan you walked on as you walked around in it. And if you're a real hot prospect to buy a house, I understand you got one of these watches. The logo is a girl on a bike being chased by a dog, or being followed by a dog, let's say, and the dog overtakes the poor girl every 60 seconds on this watch. This is, it's not always, sometimes you're just asked to solve one particular problem. The New York Times building, is why Times Square is named Times Square. That's the original one. The first time I went to the Times, they were in this heap of masonry on West 43rd Street. And then about a little more than 15 years ago, they moved into where they are now, the Renzo Piano Fox and Powell design building on 8th Avenue between 40th and 41st Streets. That is still in the Times Square Special District. And that means that if you're in the Times Square Special District, among other things, you are required, it's bizarro world for signage ordinances. In most other places in America, you can't have signs that are big, you can't have signs that flash on and off, you can't have signs that are stuck on the building. They want things to be subtle and architecturally integrated. In Times Square, they don't want that. They want big, flashy signs stuck on all the buildings so as to maintain the character of Times Square. Renzo Piano had designed, and the Renzo Piano Workshop had designed this building that was all glass, as you probably know, and that has a bunch of porcelain rods that act as sunshades in the summer and retain heat in the winter. And then I was simply told, figure out a way to get a big sign on this thing without blocking anyone's view. And I said, well, just paint it on those rods. They said, no, it has to be stuck on the building. We already tried the paint on the rods thing. They won't accept that. It has to be stuck on the building. So they want it to look more like this. What we did was, and they like more signs rather than less signs, so we said, okay, what if we have like 800 plus little things stuck on the building, each one of which is a little thing shaped like a teardrop, and they lock around those rods, and when you put them all together, they start to look like the logo of the New York Times, and when you look at them from underneath, because they stick out in those little teardrop shapes, they all merge into the logo. But when you look at them straight through, they sort of disappear because you're looking kind of like online with that little teardrop, and you have an unimpeded view of the Port Authority bus terminal and sunset over New Jersey. So, and I'm told, I heard and I just repeated because I like the sound of it, that is the obituary department there. So, thinking about our own mortality behind these giant fracture letters. And so, and up till the moment this was installed, we had done tests in remote parts of New Jersey with sample, prototypes, and I still wasn't sure it would work. And at one point, someone from the Times said, "Are you sure this is going to work?" And I said, "Not really." And so I just was being honest. But one day I was on a bus going up 8th Avenue. I thought, "Hey, this is the week that sign's going up." And I switched to the right-hand side of the bus. Sure enough, there it was. And I just started almost like jumping up and down and saying, "It works! Like, where is he going to read?" And people really moved away from me on the bus. It's a good way to get space on the bus if you want. We also had in our scope was to do all the signs on the inside. Some of them were just people's names. Frank Rich's is not there anymore, obviously. Maureen Dowd is still there. But then we had to do all the signs for the rooms that have fixed functions. And so we decided for each of those signs, we would get a picture from the photo archive of the New York Times called the morgue there. It's very death obsessed when you think about it, the obituary department, the morgue, everything else. And we'd make all of them different as well. So every men's room sign has guys doing different things on them. Every ladies' room sign, women's room sign has women doing different things on theirs. And then every room has just some kind of evocative image that's meant to kind of bring to life a little bit of the history of the New York Times in this brand new shiny building with beautiful interiors that Gensler did that had none of the horrible clutter, but beloved, I suspect, clutter that they had on West 43rd Street. Also clean, also nice. So this was meant to reinstate a little bit of the essence of what newsmaking was. Equipment rooms, lots of team rooms, so lots of metaphors for what teams are. Sometimes not metaphors, but literal pictures of teams, people dancing in synchronicity, conference centers, conference rooms, pantries, copy room, some stat room. I think that has to do with statistics. It might not, though. There are these rooms that are privacy rooms, because there's all glass conference rooms in there. There's like these rooms that are opaque that you go in to take that call from your doctor when the tests come in and, break up with your with your boyfriend or girlfriend. I've been doing this a lot. I still don't quite know what happens in a riser closet, but I think it has to do with like rising. You guys know, I don't know. Don't tell me now, I don't want to know. They have a balcony. You know. I'll show you a couple projects where I got it wrong first, and because it was just interesting to see how dogged I am with sticking with the wrong idea. You know this one, Brad Klupfel, Columbus Circle, the home of the Museum of Arts and Design. They asked me to do the signage for it and to do a logo for them, and I knew immediately what I wanted to do, because Brad had done this thing, as most of you know, that has to do with this slot that's cut into the facade of the building and then cuts through the ceilings and the floors and snakes all around, shown there in that diagram. And I said I want the logo to do the same thing. I want it to be a continuous line that spells out the name of the museum. So there's something to do with, I don't know whether it's like topology or science or something, but it only works with certain kinds of letters. And it turns out you can't do it with MAD, it doesn't work, but you can do it with A plus D. So I said, okay, this is a great logo, and what I propose is, not only do you get this great new logo, but you sort of get a new name. I want people to call you A plus D, because that's arts plus design. Museum sounds old-fashioned, we don't want that. Let's forget about that. MAD, it's a terrible acronym, because it sort of sounds crazy or angry, you don't want that. Let's go with A plus D. And they were like, okay. And I said, see how it snakes around like that? It's so good. And they're like, right, and that's important? I said, yeah, it's, just like the way the thing goes in the building. Like, okay. And then they said, why is that that looks like an A in the plus sign. Why is that a D and not an O? I said, because it's got that thing chopped off in the corner that's round. He said, well, wouldn't it be round on the bottom too? I said, it doesn't work if it's round on the bottom. And so, so I came back and I said, they don't get it. We're going to make some prototypes and make this real for them. So first we showed it could have all these different colors, and it could be like done all these different ways. And so I showed them this, and they still weren't convinced. And I came back and said, we're going to make some shopping bags. And so we made some shopping bags. So, and by the way, if you work with graphic designers, this is what we do. We sort of make these prototypes. Architects can't make prototypes full size, so achingly real of their buildings, but we can. You can do fly-throughs. That isn't as good as making a real shopping bag, trust me. And so they still weren't convinced, and finally I came back and I said, I think we're digging a hole in the wrong place, and we're just making it deeper, and it's not helping. So what if it was just, we used MAD, what would it be? And so it's on Columbus Circle, right? I believe it's the only complete traffic circle, completely round traffic circle in Manhattan at least. And it's a squarish building on that circle, a square and a circle. You take these circles, you do that, and there it is, MAD. And it sort of reminds us of those lollipops that Ada Louise so beloved in that ground floor, the Venetian Palazzo on lollipops, those little arches. And so, and this is one of the things where it just was like, I felt like I'd been like trying to, someone was just, I was like trying to like, pound through a door by just like hitting it with a battering ram over and over again. And then someone said, there's another door around the back, and I just went around to that door and it just clicked and it opened and I walked in. It was so easy. And so it does all the things the other one does except nicer. It also renders this whole typeface so then you can write anything you want in. So they're able to effectively hijack all 26 letters of the alphabet, not just the 3 that are associated with their acronym. You can write all this stuff in it. You can put it in the building. You can kind of create all the stuff for the gift shop. You can do a shopping bag. So it's like, at least if you're doing graphic design, that it's a better idea when suddenly it just does itself. And this was a case where it did itself. You can't really read that. That says if you can read this, you are mad. But it became this secret code that that associated people with that great institution. And part of my problem is that I like to talk. I talk fast, and it took me a while to learn to just listen to what people were telling me, because they reveal everything if you just shut up and listen. So this is another project that I was having trouble listening properly in. This is Michael Tilson Thomas, who wears many hats, but among other things, he's the director of something called the New World Symphony in Miami. There's some funny history he has with Frank O. Gehry, where I believe Mr. Gehry babysat Michael Tilson Thomas babysat young Frank. No, I'm taking my cue. I had it right the first time, Karen Stein. I'm going back to my original. So one of them babysat the other one. Let's just leave it at that. But they knew each other as young people in LA way back when, or maybe Toronto. I'm not going to dig myself any deeper with this. But he was commissioned, Frank Gehry was commissioned to design this building in Miami to be the home of New World Symphony. And again, we were asked to do a logo for New World Symphony. And I was very smitten with the plans that that Gary Partners had done for the building. It's a box out of which is exploding, these typically articulated forms. And it was one of those ones where I said, I think I know what I want to do. And we tried the first thing, and I said, this is it. Let's just send them this one thing. Do it Vignelli style, one idea and out, And so I said, okay, here it is. No three-letter acronyms, because that's sounds too mechanical. And NWS almost takes as long to say as New World Symphony. So we're going to take these three forms, and then we're just going to bend them all these different ways, so they have this unstable relationship with each other, and they sort of evoke those forms of the building, right? So I sent this to him, and I didn't hear anything, so I called him up and said, what do you think of what we sent you? And I thought the only question they would have was, how can we thank you? The only question they had was, did you know that this made people feel a little bit sick when they looked at it? They literally said it made people feel nauseous when they looked at it. So there's certain things you can't really respond to with, and so I said, well, I didn't want to make anyone feel sick to their stomach, so let's try something else. So we came up with this other idea, because it's a modern building and they're doing classical repertoire in it. What if it was like a classic letter form alternating with a modern one, so you get this kind of metronomic sort of thing, and it has the right number of letters and they line up nice, and I thought maybe this could be it. But they thought this was not it. And Michael Tilson Thomas kept sort of saying, I want something that kind of flows in a way. And this, I like it, but it just doesn't flow. And then I thought, well, maybe it needs to be NW. Okay, I kept saying I hate three-letter acronyms to a guy who is referred to as MTT. And after a while, I sort of realized that it was that was not working for me either. And so I said, okay, let's go with NWS. So I made these Gary-esque forms and put them together, and that kind of was sort of okay, but still didn't feel fluid enough. So I said, okay, I'm going to paint these by hand. I did that. That doesn't look very good. Then we had this weird thing where, okay, it's a box with these things in it, so why don't we do this? This looks like an anthrax manufacturing facility, National Anthrax Association. I don't know, it's not good. And then of course, we graphic designers do things where you sort of wait till you see what we're going to do with it, though. We're going to put pictures of musicians in it. Oh, that's better, So finally, I got this call from the executive director who said, I'm going to send you a PDF, don't freak out. And it was a Friday, and she sent me this, which she said, I said, what is this? And he said, well, Michael had some time and kind of just did some sketches. And it was sort of like someone saying, oh, for God's sake, I'll show you, And I remember that was my career has not had, I'm an optimistic, cheerful person, and I don't think I have a lot of low points in my life, but that was sort of, I've never felt as horrible as when I got this PDF. And I remember, and then at first I felt bad. I went through these different stages. First I felt really deflated and horrible. It had come to this, why don't we just tell them the answer? They felt sorry for me. Let's just tell them what to do. And then I remember I went home to my lovely wife Dorothy, and I said, really though, where does he get off? Conductor. It's do I presume to be a conductor? It doesn't look that hard. I think you get up and you do this. And so then that was Friday night, and I woke up on Saturday, and I felt. And I sort of thought, no, wait a second. Michael has given me a gift. He's a really busy person, and he's taken time to actually think about this and shared his thoughts with me. It's not an insult. It's not a provocation. It's actually a gift. It's the opportunity for insight. So I started looking at this and thinking, he kept talking about flow. Then I remember kind of my sarcastic sort of gesture, what conductors, I thought, well, that's what they do. It's that's what flow is. And what he's trying to do here, I realize, is connect up these three unlike letters, which are so hard to do. And so there he is. But that's if you forget what conducting looks like, you can get a book on it, but it sort of flows. And not only that, but look at who's doing the building. And not only that, but look at what sound actually is. It's just these oscillating frequencies, right? And so I spent the rest of the weekend trying to reconcile this thing. And I sensed there was math involved, which is why I was counting all the intersections somehow. But I realized then you could do something that just kind of worked like this, where there'd be an N, and then a W, and then an S that did that. And it sort of has that, there's some kind of symmetry, like biaxial symmetry, where it actually is sort of actually a legitimate gesture that a conductor could do, and it says NWS. So it ended up looking like that when we were done, and this is one of those cases where the client told me the answer. Instead of frantically trying to talk someone into my idea, I just quietly listened to their idea, and it was the right idea. So then he can put pictures of musicians on it, and it sort of makes everything okay. Put on an umbrella. And there it is, you peek at it, it's like, it's not, you know, once you get in the building you see more, but from the outside you just sort of see it projected on that beautiful facade. It's really a great building, I think, and beautiful place to see music, and you can, on the lawn, to see music from the West 8 landscape on the outside. Sometimes we're given a project that's almost like purely technical in nature. We were hired by the Department of Transportation under former Commissioner Jeanette Sadekhan, sorry, I was rolling so confidently up to that point, and to do a citywide wayfinding system for all of New York. We worked on this large team that involved consultants and researchers and topographers and product designers doing this thing that came to be known as Walk NYC. Came up with all this theoretical stuff, 5 places they were going to use to launch it, including the new bike, what we now know as the City Bike program, all the maps on City Bike. Interviewed a bunch of people, walked the streets. I kept this thing just funny. As part of the research, people were asked to draw a map of New York City. So this one I really like because Manhattan is an island, and then if you leave Manhattan and drive east on the George Washington Bridge, you'll meet New Jersey, and as you drive east, you will glimpse another island called Brooklyn, which is reached by a parallel bridge called the Williamsburg Bridge. It's all like very interesting. So lots of this sort of studying, and you know, we were just really being asked to do part of an overall information system that helps people navigate New York. And you know, knew that we had to kind of create these pylons that would have this sort of information, and also knew that we were working with a bunch of different systems. So this was an opportunity in a way to pay homage to the man who brought me to New York in the first place, Massimo Vignelli, who did the most resilient kind of symbolic graphic design statement of what New York City is, which is the graphics that were designed in the late 60s for the New York subway system, and more or less still are deployed exactly the same way as designed with just a few changes. And so, you know, it was originally a type, they couldn't get Helvetica originally. I could go on about this story. They couldn't get Helvetica originally, but eventually it was meant to be Helvetica, so now it is Helvetica. And we tried all these different typefaces for our maps, and I kept saying Helvetica is Swiss. I want to use something American and New Yorky, and there are good choices, but every time you'd set something like Midtown in Helvetica, it just looked like New York City. And it looks like New York City because all of us see these signs all the time. And so we designed this slight variation of Helvetica, which is proprietary to the DOT, called Helvetica DOT. And if you want to astonish your friends, it is identifiable because all of the dots over the I's and all the periods and semicolons and umlauts, if you should encounter one, they're all round instead of square. Regular Helvetica, they're square. Helvetica DOT, they're round. This is to stop people from using Arial, actually. It has to have round things. So that's the typeface. The color palette is very neutral. We redesigned sort of the icon system to have them all go together. Did a lot of maniacal things that just we do because we can't not. You know, so if anyone says, why is the lady's shoulder on the bathroom sign shaped like that? Well, it had to correspond exactly to the way the curve on the leg of the R is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is important, trust me. You know, I would notice. You don't care, I would notice. And then we did a bunch of other custom things, redesigned the bike logo so it looked more like a city bike, put Milton Glazer's I Heart New York logo on the shopping bag to indicate shopping. And then had to design a system for showing icons in the city. How much detail do you show? We mechanized a lot of these processes, but these things were drawn laboriously by an army of interns, you know, who would start with something like this, reduce it to something like that, so it could look like something like that. And there are lots and lots of these things, and we're still kind of creating more of them now. And the system looks like that. The product design aspects are meant to evoke modernist New York, and so they go together, that Billings-Jackson design, they go together in this very sort of modernist kind of kit of parts way. Assembled and erected in the dead of night. And now if you go around, you'll see things that look like that, or there's another girl with a ponytail and a bike, no dog, oddly enough. So New York Celebration, not that different as a place, just 2 small towns. And so every map you see is that. We also did this thing that you'll notice perhaps, where it uses this thing called heads-up mapping, meaning that the way you're facing, the top of the map is the direction you're facing. So if you're facing downtown, the entire map will quote-unquote be upside down. And I remember looking at this in our office and thinking, this is preposterous. People are going to go crazy. But instead, when you actually show these people the maps on the streets, because everyone's so used to looking at GPS systems, they sort of think, yeah, of course the direction I'm going is up. Like, so Chinatown is like up, and despite anything that Comden and White or Leonard Bernstein may have said to the contrary, the Bronx is down and the Battery is up on some of these maps. And it's real joy, even though people supposedly have all this stuff in their pockets. I never see one of these maps without people standing in front of them, pointing at them, planning where they're going to go. And they're not electronic. They're sort of just designed to take a punishment, and they do so pretty nicely. So off the shores of Manhattan is a place called Governor's Island, and we worked with Leslie Koch out there and West 8 doing the signage for that. It's a similar thing, except you're designing this wonderland, which is a place apart. And you guys probably all know the premise of how it's being developed. But so we were doing the graphics to support the public open spaces and parks that are in progress out there right now. This is another thing where I had lots of bad ideas before my partner Paula Scher said, why don't you just make everything kind of look like the gantries that the ships go into? That way they could also look a little bit like trellises, and they could be consumed by the vegetation, hopefully. That was my dream, to do signs that would eventually just succumb to the wilderness of Governor's Island. So not quite, but we redesigned the typeface to make it a little bit more curvaceous and harbor-like, I think, putting in these nice little curves where they were necessary. And if you go there now, that's the typeface you see. It's an island with its own typeface. And these signs you can see through, so you can always glimpse the amazing views. Designed to accept modular inserts for events and maps and stuff like that. Designed so that one day they might be consumed by vegetation, I hope. And we worked with West 8 really carefully to sort of come up with the way the hardware works. Even the street signs sort of are like this. And and it is sort of a great, I mean, I assume all of you have been there, but if you haven't. And by the way, when you're asking someone to design signs, this is the only sign that really matters. People like when you do these surveys in buildings, fancy museums, anything, what's the most common question is, where's the bathroom? That's all anyone cares about. Where's the bathroom? Then where's the Mona Lisa? But first, where's the bathroom? And it's actually, it's fun. This reminded me a bit of Celebration, kind of going off somewhere and doing it on its own. So this is a project that we had started with one of my colleagues here, Arthur Cohen, who's in the audience, on behalf of the American Institute of Architects, where we were asked to kind of do a repositioning project to kind of reaffirm architects' commitment to their community in a way. You can get it here, but nationally, the AIA is the largest group of design professionals, I think, in the world, all united in one thing. So it was about how do you actually reinstate kind of like the passion that gets people into architecture at the beginning. So I'll show you some technical things first. That's the original seal, then they got this eagle on a column, then that, and then finally that. And one of the things, having learned at Lever House and learned on Governor's Island and learned in some other places how great it can be to have your own typeface and what an easy thing that is to kind of pull everything together, we decided we'd kind of create a proprietary typeface for the AIA called Archetype, which sort of starts with the Bodoni they've been using, takes note of the fact that this looks like maybe a Doric column or a I-beam, and then sort of like takes that, kind of puts the things on the top and bottom of the column. Those have names, I assume, don't bother. And then there's something about posts and lintels where the horizontal members aren't load-bearing, so they can be thinner. And so we decided to sort of do that with all the letters. So we have this peculiar kind of alphabet where the horizontal members are being borne by the loads, are loads being borne by the vertical members. And so it gives you all these kind of like moments like that. That adds up to something that feels a little bit like that when you kind of play it all the way out. So soon, ever more, like increasingly, when you get correspondence from AIA, it's in this proprietary typeface, and the day will come where you will simply see a couple letters written in this typeface, and you'll know immediately it's from AIA, and then you can draw your own conclusions. The first debut of this stuff was for the convention that they held a few years ago in 2014 in Chicago. So we hijacked a lot of slogans from famous Chicago architects. And then kind of came up with this way to insert AIA literally into Chicago, just by misspelling Chicago slightly. I always wanted to do a t-shirt like that, but then you could do different things like that as well. with LaPlaca Cohen, kind of proposed a campaign for architects running in places like the New Yorker with the theme Building a Better World. And then with Arthur and his firm, we did a huge amount of research, kind of like talking about why people become architects and what purpose the AIA is meant to play in their lives. And I think it actually is, that same purpose can be extended to the Architectural League or to the thing that drives you to come to something like this, I would say. And we had all this research, and I said I was convinced you could kind of reduce it to a manifesto that you could read in 100 seconds. So I'll just because there are some architects here, I'll try this manifesto out on you actually. So, so it's more than 3 letters after your name, or a taste in exotic eyewear, or the color of clothes in your closet. It's more than the sleepless nights, the brutal critiques, the hundreds of hours spent alone in front of a computer, the tight budgets, the overdue invoices. It's looking at empty space and seeing a world of possibilities. It's transforming a complex problem into a brilliantly simple solution. It's knowing that today's investment in our built environment will be repaid 100 times over tomorrow. It's believing that the way our surroundings are designed can change the way we live. This is what drives us. This is what it is to be an architect. But this thing we do cannot be done alone. We need clients who can believe in a power of reality that does not yet exist. We need to listen to the people who will live, work, and play in the places we create. We need leadership in our communities and in our profession. We need each other. We are America's architects. We are committed to building a better world, and we can only do it together. So here's the big moment with the logo. Watch it. See, get us the I and the we. It's like a thing. Thank you. I get teared up. Okay, so this is the last little case history I have to share with you. It's the longest sustained relationship I've had with a single client is with the Architectural League of New York. As I said, when I started working for Massimo Vignelli, one of the first projects I did indeed was for the League, and he was then on the board. I was given the work that he had volunteered to do for the League. I was the go-to person because I was the lowest paid employee and hence had the lowest hourly rate that could be written off as we did all this free work for the League. And after, when I grew up, I myself joined the board of the League, and for a while Massimo and I kind of served together. Then Massimo became a board member emeritus, and I became the person who, yet I continue to do all the free work for the League, actually, oddly enough, now that I think about it. And it's been amazingly satisfying. It's, at first, I was enchanted by this lady and the seal and everything, and eventually I was persuaded, after much struggle, to do the logo that you saw as you were coming in. But over the years, this goes all the way back to the early 80s, doing all the posters for Emerging Voices. If any of you are fans of the band Chicago, this is exactly how those covers work. They had a cover that looked like this, Chicago 4 live at Carnegie Hall was exactly like this. Eclecticism. So we did a whole bunch of these. Then the first thing I did at Vignelli that I was allowed, that Massimo encouraged me to sign with my own name in the credit was a series that I did for lectures that were sponsored about single people giving lectures. This was Jim Sterling. This was Arthur Drexler. Then I've done all the posters for the what was then called the Young Architects Competition, today's called the League Prize. Usually, again, learning how to listen to the architects, the young architects on the Young Architects Committee who always had their own ideas about what the posters could look like and were surprisingly right more than I was often. Hypotheses. theme was scale one year. This was back when we didn't care as much about sustainability, and giant posters with tiny type on them seemed like a cheeky way to get a message out. You know, and then a lot of the work for emerging voices has been collected in this book that debuted earlier this year, and a real labor of love for us as well. The League has had different homes and moved down to Broadway, and then we've done announcements for the Beaux-Arts Ball. Originally, these two were big posters. This is probably the most famous thing I've ever designed. It was in a movie with Rooney Mara called, and Angelina Jolie, called Side Effects. I don't know if any of you saw that, a Steven Soderbergh movie. They filmed it partly at Pentagram. There's a scene where Rooney Mara enters a bathroom. This poster is on the wall of the bathroom, and then she obscures it briefly. Then she bends over and throws up into the toilet, and you look at nothing but my poster while she pukes. It's fantastic. Thank you, Architectural League. And no, we don't do posters anymore, but we do tote bags that you can spot like-minded architects at the unlikeliest of places if you see them carrying a bag that looks like this, or one that perhaps has this cryptic thing on it from last year's theme, Craft. And now what was once, you know, glorious posters fit for the Museum of Modern Art is just these things that are variously pronounced either GIFs or GIFs that get emailed to you and convince you to come all the way out to the dark side of Queens, New York, to go to a beautiful party in an extraordinary space as you did last time. So it's been a really amazing experience for me to kind of work for nearly 35 years with the League. Probably one of the high points was several years ago, the President's Medal was given to Massimo and Lella Vignelli. We were invited to do the program for it, so we had this idea of just taking a bunch of Vignelli quotes and putting a different one at everyone's place that held the program. I was able to get some uncut sheets of this program and persuaded Massimo to pose with it, and it was a nice way to pay homage to the man that actually taught me so much, the man that introduced me to so many of you in this room. And even though he's not with us today, I'd like to thank him, and I would like to thank you for inviting me this evening. Thank you.